The mood was tense in the briefing room of the Zari battlecruiser Hive's Vengeance, where Commander Kelra paced in front of the soldiers. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of grudging respect and primal fear as she prepared to reveal one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Zari Intelligence Division. "Warriors," she began, her voice cutting through the awkward silence with a deep rasp. "What you are about to see is highly classified footage from Firebase Echo on the human colony world of New Therma. Officially, this planet has been listed as abandoned, with a population of 0. She paused, her mandibles clicking in the Khazari equivalent of a humorless smile. "Unofficially, you are about to see the future of human warfare," she said. "Many of us had hoped that the future was just nightmare fuel from the minds of our most paranoid analysts." Vexina turned on the central hologram. The image came to life in a blurry but clear way. A group of human soldiers going about their daily work on what looked like any other military base. At first look, there was nothing strange about what I saw, but when the camera fixed on specific people, the Xari ranks let out gasps and confused chirps. One person lifted a big crate with strength that didn't seem human. The huge weight seemed like a child's toy to her stronger muscles. Another soldier shimmered for a moment, their shape blurring as their camouflage membrane accurately matched their surroundings. A third moved at an unnaturally fast and quick rate, and its reactions were so sharp that they were impossible not to kill. Kaelra talked about reflex integration, adaptive camouflage, and making your muscles stronger. Her voice was straining under the weight of sad understanding. "And that, my soldiers, is just what we can see on the outside." The screen changed to show a person lying on a hospital slab. At first, it looked like a normal sight, but the soldiers couldn't take their eyes off of the human's arm as it started to change. Metal and circuitry flowed like liquid, reshaping the limb into a deadly appendage that hummed with the contained energies of a powerful weapon. "Nanny integration," the commander explained, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. "Billions upon billions of microscopic machines working in perfect symbiosis with human biology. They can reshape their forms at will, adapt their bodies to any environment or tactical situation in real time." This made everyone in the room shiver. "Another young warrior, their newly molted carapace still shining, but that's completely disgusting," someone said. "What made them do those awful things to themselves?" Kaelra's laugh didn't mean anything funny. "Young Zari, you think like one. For people, this is not a violation or a filthy act. It's an improvement. We call it development." The screen kept going, silently judging, showing more examples of how humans and machines can work together. People who are soldiers and have metal exoskeletons attached to their bodies. Their neural networks were immediately connected to their weapons systems, heightened their senses so they could see and even control forces that were not visible to the naked eye. In the back of the room, Drogon's huge body moved unsteadily, and his tentacles rippled. He used to be ready to brush off humans as an unimportant threat, but he could no longer deny the growing pit of primitive fear that was opening in his chest. "By the black trails," he muttered, using an ancient expletive from the days when the Zari had been forced to migrate across the radiation-blasted wastelands of their homeworld. "These things, they're not even human anymore." Kaelra whirled on him, mandibles clicking in furious cadence. "Oh, but that's where you're wrong, you ignorant grub this. This is the culmination of what it means to be human." She stalked towards the hulking soldier, angrily punctuating the air with each point. While we clung to the limited forms, evolution graced us with these humans simply remade themselves where we are bound by our biology. They have transcended it for them. The lines between machine and organic, between physical and energy, are not barriers, merely suggestions to be adapted to and overcome. Zakthor seemed to shrink beneath her burning gaze around them. The rest of the warriors had fallen into an awed, terrified silence. The only sounds the faint whirring of the holographic projectors and the distant thrum of the ship's engines. Finally, Vexina turned away, her voice taking on a somber, hollow tone. We face an enemy not bound by the rigid laws we have taken for granted. An enemy that does not think or perceive the universe the same way we do. They will not play by our rules, because they have rewritten the rules themselves to be as malleable as their own transient flesh. She reactivated the display, the images of augmented human nightmares bathing the room in their sickly crimson glow. So watch well, my soldiers. Study these images. Analyze every grotesque, unnatural strength and ability. Then burn them into your thoughts, your memories, your souls. For I fear these horrors may be the last fleeting hope we have of understanding, and thus surviving, the enemy we have awoken across the stars. The room remained deathly quiet as Kaelra's words lingered in the stillness like a pall. Survival against such monstrous adversaries seemed an impossibility, yet every Sari present knew their commander spoke only harsh truth. In that moment, their universe, until now an inviolable order of species each bound to their genetic paths, had irrevocably changed. The humans had not just redefined the limits of their physical forms, they had shattered the very foundations of what life itself could be. And the Khazari warriors, bathed in the bloody holograms of Terran alchemy, knew their race could only adapt or be consumed by this new evolution. The tense silence in the war room was shattered by the thunderous rumble of engines firing up for jump. Vex felt the familiar lurch in her carapace as artificial gravity struggled to compensate for the massive ship's abrupt shift to hypervelocities. She gripped the edge of the situation table, her claws leaving deep scores in the molecular alloy surface as klaxons blared and status reports flickered across the holographic displays. Terran, her seasoned comms officer, somehow managed to look unruffled despite the chaos, his 4 pairs of hands dancing across the control surfaces with practiced ease. Jump successful, Commander. We're on course for the rendezvous coordinates in the Redulian Nebula. Vex exhaled slowly, the filtered air hissing through her spiracles. She flexed her abdomen, feeling the strain of muscles shifting beneath her iridescent exoskeleton. Every jump burned more calories than a solid week of combat maneuvers, a necessary sacrifice for the ships that carried entire Khazari hive clusters across the vast gulfs of space. Maintain stealth protocols, she ordered crisply. I don't want any anomalous energy signatures giving away our position until we've confirmed the security of the rendezvous site. Even light years from the nearest human outpost, Vex took no chances these days. The unsettling revelation of their adversaries' capabilities, their flagrant disregard for the natural order, had shaken her to her very core. She was a soldier, born and bred for the glories of open battle, where the rhythms of claw and mandible decided the victor. This new mode of warfare, one of subterfuge and deception, left her off balance in a way no amount of training could have prepared her for. Her restless gaze swept over the war room's dimly lit confines, the ranks of busy techs, analysts, and soldiers attending to their duties with a focused diligence that should have been reassuring. And yet Vex felt something else lurking beneath that industry, a current of fear and uncertainty that had seeped into the ranks like a noxious vapor. She couldn't blame them. Not after seeing those recordings, manipulating energy fields with a mere thought, remolding flesh and bone through sheer force of will. It defied everything their science understood about the universe. The humans treated the fundamental laws of nature as mere inconveniences to be overcome. And those flickering images were just the beginning, a tantalizing glimpse of their godlike mastery over the material world. Who knew what other nightmarish technologies they had cooking behind those implacable smiles and shimmering eyes? Vex shuddered, her carapace clacking in a sustained ripple of unease. For the first time since her final molting season, she felt the frisson of genuine dread, not for her own life. That was a soldier's perpetual hazard. No, she feared something worse. The slow, inexorable erosion of everything she knew of every truth and certainty that gave shape to her world. A subtle chime drew her attention to the primary tactical display there rendered in stark holographic relief hung the insignia of the Clyden Collective Allies. In theory, at least their role at this secret summit remained ambiguous at best. Just one more uncertainty to add to the growing pile. Vex felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down like a Drexolian gravity field. Her crew, her people, her entire civilization stood at the precipice, balanced precariously between the ordered reality they knew and something else. Something woven into the very fabric of space and time by a terrifyingly advanced alien species. For the briefest of instants, she envied the oblivious masses of her race, those who had yet to glimpse the true depths of the abyss, now looming before them. But only for an instant. She was Khazari, and to turn away from a fight, no matter how apocalyptic, was against her very nature. Ensign projected time until rendezvous, 14.3, local cycles commander. 14 long stretches of motionless boredom interspersed with bouts of frantic activity as the ship's strained systems were pushed to their limits. 14 opportunities to indulge in quiet reflection and soul-searching, or if she were feeling particularly reckless, 14 chances to ignite the fires of dread into an all-consuming inferno of paranoia. Either way, she would face this threat, head-on, mandibles bared and claws at the ready. Survival was their obligation, their singular imperative as a species, and if the humans wished to sow discord through their arrogant upending of the natural order, then so be it. From the ashes of her shaken convictions, Vex felt a newfound resolve take root, hardening her soul with each passing tick of the chronometer. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford, only action, and the grim determination to meet this enemy on their own trans-dimensional playing field. Quashing the last vestiges of doubt, she turned to face her bridge crew, her voice thrumming with a forceful timbre that brooked no argument. Transitive theorists, I want scenario projections for every conceivable outcome running in parallel cycles. Temporal mechanics, start crunching potential futures to map out strategic contingencies. Engineering, I want us locked and sealed up tighter than the hydrogen core of a red dwarf star. The commander's voice rang out across the bridge like a klaxon, her barked orders cutting through the ambient thrum of machinery. With crisp authority, mandibles clicked and limbs blurred into frenetic motion as the crew scrambled to obey her directives in the ship's auxiliary science labs. Banks of biocomputers hummed with escalating intensity, their labyrinthine matrices of organic circuitry glowing faintly as they crunched data parameters far beyond standard computational limits. Vex wasn't taking any chances. If the tactical simulations required calculating potential outcomes across 1,000 trillion interweaving probability strands, then by the great drones she would have the processing power to make it happen. Lieutenant Lyara, her chief transitive theorist, worked feverishly alongside her team of matrix weavers. On a holographic display suspended before her, symbolic regression algorithms spun and unraveled like strands of hyper-compressed code, each one representing an alternate causal pathway through the multiverse. "Reconfigure the chrono-manifold harmonics," Liara barked, her syllables clipped with the intensity of her focus. "We need to expand the temporal displacement vectors by 6 parallel arcs to achieve sufficient scenario coverage." Her words were met with a frantic whir of acknowledgement as the team complied, rerouting data streams with cybernetic precision. All around them, specialized analysis pods pulsed in rhythmic cycles, interfacing with the woven logic matrices to generate ever more granular predictive simulations. On the far side of the lab, Lieutenant Rylos oversaw the separate contingent of temporal mechanics. Here, the focus was less on mapping probability vortices and more on charting concrete temporal permutations across established timeline forks. "Increase the resolution on that Kavari inflection point," he rumbled to his ops team, gesturing with one of his specialized manifold appendages. The human's temporal mastery capabilities means even the tiniest perturbations in the time stream could have catastrophic downstream effects. Time stream data cascaded in holographic rivers, ebbing and flowing in dizzying cascades of chronal flux. Drones transcribed the constant shifts, cross-referencing alternate histories and potential futures against one another. To identify strategic weak points all the while, Vex prowled the corridor between the labs like a caged pyrocorian, her eyes flicking back and forth between competing heads-up threat assessments. Her crew's efforts both awed and terrified her to map out reality itself in such painstaking detail should have been the height of hubris. And yet, when existence itself hung in the balance against an enemy who had transcended mere corporeal limitations, was any cost too high? With every passing moment, new simulations bloomed into kaleidoscopic arrays of possibility across the war room displays. First contact scenarios, open conflicts ranging from skirmishes to outright galactic conflagrations, diplomatic overtures, preemptive strikes, unholy alliances, all tracked and charted in dizzying complexity. Any single variable could propagate cascading waves of causal alterations across infinite multiverses. It was enough to shatter the psyche of a lesser species. To vex it was the forge required to recast her people's destiny. The engineering decks were no less frantic, a hive of preparation. Here, security protocols were being overhauled and enhanced to potentially universe-shattering levels of stringency. Vex needed this ship's systems to become a metaphysical vault, its databases hardened beyond even theoretical compromise. If the legends of humanity's computational transcendence were true, then no standard encryption schemas would suffice. That was a bitter truth, but one Vex embraced without hesitation in this life or death. Arms race. Bitterness was a side effect. She could live with ideally for longer than a cosmic flutter run system cycle, 6974 Delta. She ordered her chief engineering officer, who translated the command into a blistering series of counter-coded subroutines. Around them, bulkheads thrummed and gravitic shielding spiked as the ship initiated its self-modifying security lockdown sequence. Entropic static crackled over exposed surfaces, invisible waves of interference, as multi-layer encryption key generation flooded every system. And still, it wouldn't be enough, not against the technological demigods they now opposed. So, new, more esoteric methods would be employed, techniques quite literally rewriting the coding of reality itself. Here, in this sequestered section of the engineering decks, a specialized team of quantum blacksmiths delved into states of real space so abstract they existed on the very fringes of rational cognitive perception. Overriding the natural laws of causality was their charge, with all its mind-bending paradoxes and Reaver's choke-point logical fallacies. Vex tried not to dwell too long on the methodologies involved, lest her own sanity start fraying around the edges like an unstable probability vortex. Waves of Nanctonics rearranging subatomic lattices into anti-logic fractal geometries. Self-resolving indeterminate probability matrices, writing contradictory states into established fact on a loop. The end result, she was assured by her creche sisters in xenosemiotics, would be a series of metaphysical deadfalls, tar pits of recursive self-contradiction that should in theory entrap anything or anyone trying breach the ship's digital firewalls through extra-dimensional computing assaults, should such a delightfully inadequate word, holding the entire race's continued existence as a coherent species within its hollow syllable, as they neared readiness for the dreaded rendezvous. Vex felt the weight of those riding on this mission with a profundity that staggered her friends. Clutchmates, her entire lineage hung in the balance. Their fates gambled on the knife's edge of interstellar brinksmanship, and somewhere out there, the human juggernaut lumbered onward, its inexorable footsteps shaking the very pillars of reality with each ponderous stride. Vex had seen artifacts of their impossible technologies. She dared not contemplate the scope of their ambitions. Summoning her resolve, the commander turned her compound eyes back to the war room's tactical holograms, her silent vow echoing through her very DNA. Whatever came, they would be ready. Against these humans and their virally spreading transgressions against the natural order. Oblivion itself was not an option. They would endure. They would overcome. The abyss before them gaped wide and infinite. But there were far, far worse alternatives awaiting any who lacked the courage to stare over that precipice and keep climbing. As the countdown cycled towards the rendezvous point, Vex felt the weight of her people's survival pressing down upon her carapace. The burden of preserving their civilization's very existence in the face of this human juggernaut threatened to crack her exoskeleton with its magnitude. She forced herself to breathe slowly, regulating her spiracles to maintain oxygen flow and clarity of thought. Her crew worked with manic intensity all around her, a hurricane of frenzied activity giving physical form to the roiling chaos of her inner mindscape. Tactical scenarios blossomed and died in rapid cycles across the holographic situation displays. Simulated futures spun out in fractal expansions of possibility, each new variable iteration propagating a new front in this preemptive war of cognition and calculation. Her own neural clusters burned with the effort of parsing the blizzard of projections, seeking any glimmer of strategic advantage, any Achilles heel to exploit, and still the humans loomed ever larger on the existential horizon, their very existence, a paradox woven into the fraying fabric of tangible reality. They upended every scientific convention, overturned laws of nature through what seemed like sheer force of megalomaniacal will. What new blasphemies had they wrought since those damning video records were obtained? Vex tried not to dwell too deeply on such thoughts, lest they consume her utterly. But, in the ponderous lulls between frenetic tactical shifts, her mind inevitably circled back to the deepest dread. What did one do when fighting an enemy unbound from natural limitations, when the rules themselves were rewritten with each passing moment by capabilities so advanced as to render the word technology hopelessly inadequate? Discipline, tactical focus, conditional overrides layered into her autonomic synapses to bypass instinctual paralysis responses. These were the stopgaps she desperately clung to, lifelines of rationality in a universe gone fundamentally insane. Cognitive frameworks that could, if she just held them at the core of her being, help stave off the engulfing vertigo of utter negation. An amber telemetry pulse rippled across her threat assessment display, the first concrete indicator that they were closing on the rendezvous point. Even stealth running silent, their warp signatures would now be detectable if one knew when and where to look, which meant the coming convergence point transformed from a simple strategy meeting into something far more ominous, a potential first contact scenario. Whether they willed it or not, Vex felt her tarsal claws unconsciously flexing, scoring the deck plating as combat override protocols shunted lifelong tactical training to the forefront. "All decks run silent and prepare for possible hostilities," she sub-vocalized, her words translated into encrypted burst transmissions on hardline physical pathways only. No sense risking open comm channels just yet. Around her, the hive ship shuddered almost imperceptibly, the myriad components of its biology shifting to combat readiness in a complex dance, prepared for eons of necessity. At the keel heart of the hive ship broodlings clustered more tightly resonant harmonics building in terrified anticipation. Though isolated from direct combat operations, their linked synapses served as the distributed processing core for virtually every system aboard their frantic psyche chirrups, broadcast across redundant subspace harmonics, terror and courage, interwoven in nauseating counterpoint down in the central armory vaults. The warmonger cadres checked and rechecked their equipment slaving bio-interfaces and testing cybernetic augmentations. Most had resigned themselves long ago to the eventuality of perishing in glorious battle. But this was something else entirely. How did one find glory, or any sense of honored purpose, in a war against existential negation itself? The questions swirled in Vex's mind like escaping vortices of subjective reality as the klaxons began sounding. First a subtle vibration, but quickly crescendoing into a crescendo that shook the deck plating with each resounding toll. They were within the final jump proximity window. Ahead, just beyond the wavering terminus of their stealth fields, lurked what? What fresh recursions in the cosmic scar tissue awaited? She braced herself, girding her entire physiology against the mounting psychotrauma. So much more than lives or territory now hung in the balance, all their timeless scientific and philosophical works. The entire history of their civilization, everything her kind had ever achieved, all of it stood poised on the precipice of utter abnegation, all at the mercurial whims of a species who seemed to revel in toppling the natural order with a silent, inward snarl. Vex activated her external armor cladding, and combat linked her neural strata with that of the hive mind. If the humans wanted a fight against civilizational existentialism, then that was precisely what she would oblige them with. After all, the Khazari were no strangers to cosmic brushes with oblivion, like tongues of quantum fire, searing away contingency after failed contingency. They had endured the scorching of countless potential futures. They had seen realities prune and split cycling through life and death in kaleidoscopic permutations, enough to inure them to the worst the human techno-shamans might conjure now as the final count cycled inexorably down, and shrill proximity alerts sounded from every portal. Vex hunkered low on her armored thorax, and waited for them to emerge from the seething quantum turmoil of the rendezvous point. Whatever eldritch insanities their technology had spiraled into, she vowed they would discover there were some absolutes. Even the laws of blasphemous human cognition could not circumvent the Khazari. People did not extinguish easily, not without one final defiant refusal to surrender to the cosmic void. When their trans-dimensional adversaries at last flickered into coherent real space, they would meet the primal ferocity evolution had honed to an endless edge over billions of years of struggle. Against the human onslaught of unchecked metaphysical deviancy, the Khazari would pit the one unbendable force even terrifying comprehension could not undermine: the unflinching,